The static crackled first, a sound like tearing paper that ripped through the sterile air of the Tactical Operations Center. Then came the voice, strained and thin, stretched across miles of hostile mountain. Ares 1 to Archangel, we are pinned. Say again, we are pinned on Objective Serpent. Griffin is down. I repeat, Griffin is down. Heavy machine gun and mortar fire from elevated positions. We cannot move. The voice of the SEAL team leader was clipped, professional, but the ragged breathing between words told the real story. They were dying on that ridge. On the central screen, a satellite feed showed the jagged spine of the mountain, a smear of smoke marking the wreckage of the Apache gunship that was supposed to have been their guardian angel. Red icons, representing enemy positions, blinked with venomous intensity around the single, besieged blue icon of Ares' team. Colonel Madsen stood with his hands braced on the central console, his knuckles white. His jaw was a knot of granite. Where is our relief package? I want every available asset spun up now. An airman, no older than 20, flinched at the commander's tone. Sir, QRF is 40 minutes out. The storm cell moving in is making a rotary wing insertion impossible. The ceiling is dropping too fast, another officer added. And their anti-air network is active. We lost Griffin to a lucky manpad's shot. Anything slower than a missile is a coffin. The room was a tomb of hushed calculations and grim realities. Every option led to a dead end. In the corner, away from the cluster of frantic authority, Captain Eva Rostova stood perfectly still. She was a ghost in a flight suit, her presence barely registered. She wasn't supposed to be here. Grounded. Reassigned to simulator logistics after the incident. Her eyes, a pale, piercing gray, were fixed on the tactical display, not on the chaos of the command staff. She wasn't seeing the icons. She was seeing the wind shear, the thermal layers, the dead space in the enemy's radar coverage. She saw a path, a suicidal, thread-the-needle corridor through the storm and the rock that no sane pilot would ever attempt. It was a path that existed for only one aircraft, and for only one pilot. She took a single step forward, her voice quiet but cutting through the rising panic. Sir, the F-12 can get there. Colonel Madsen turned, his gaze finally landing on her. It was a look of pure dismissal, layered with the memory of her hearing. The F-12 Wraith was a prototype, a temperamental ghost of an aircraft that had nearly killed her 6 months ago during a high-G test flight. Its official report read pilot error, a black mark that had ended her career as a test pilot and exiled her to this dusty outpost. Captain Rostova, you are not cleared for flight status, and that aircraft is not combat certified. The subject is closed, his voice was iron. Each word a hammer blow meant to put her back in her corner. Another officer, a major with a neatly trimmed mustache, smirked. The Wraith? We'd be lucky if it made it off the runway, sir. Let alone through that storm. Rostova's expression didn't change. Her face was a stoic mask, but her eyes held the fire of absolute certainty. The telemetry is wrong, Colonel. The airframe can handle the sheer stress if you bypass the limiters. Its stealth profile is more than a match for their Soviet-era radar. It's the only asset that can thread that canyon system undetected. Madsen's face hardened. He saw not a solution, but a disgraced pilot trying to reclaim glory. I will not risk our only 5th-gen prototype and its pilot on a reckless gamble. Your grounding was for a reason, Captain. You pushed the limits too far. This conversation is over. He turned his back on her, a gesture of finality that echoed through the tense room. Her input was rejected. Her presence was an annoyance. Eva Rostova watched him for a moment longer, her gaze tracing the frantic red icons that were slowly strangling the life out of Ares' team. The colonel had given an order, but he hadn't seen the path she saw. He hadn't flown the ghost. She turned, not toward her designated corner, but toward the door, her movements silent and purposeful. She didn't run. She walked with a calm, measured pace that defied the urgency thrumming in her veins. The hangar was cavernous, a cathedral of steel and concrete smelling of hydraulic fluid and ozone. There it sat under the harsh sodium lights, a creature of sharp angles and matte black skin that seemed to drink the light around it. the F-12 Wraith. It wasn't sleek like a fighter. It was brutal, a weaponized shard of obsidian. Near the cockpit, a long, jagged scar marred the composite skin, a poorly patched reminder of the day it had tried to tear itself apart in the sky, with her inside it. Master Sergeant Cole, a man whose face was a roadmap of 3 decades of service, met her by the boarding ladder. He held out a helmet, no questions asked. "Heard the chatter," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Madsen's a fool. He sees the report, not the pilot." Eva took the helmet, the familiar weight a comfort in her hands. She began her pre-flight ritual, a silent, methodical dance she had performed 1,000 times. She pulled on her G-suit, the hiss of the seals a familiar whisper. As she zipped up her flight suit, her fingers brushed against a small, weathered patch on her left shoulder. It was a simple embroidered silhouette of a hawk in a steep dive, the insignia of her grandfather, a test pilot from an era of slide rules and raw nerve who had died pushing an experimental craft past its breaking point. He had taught her that machines had souls, and that the best pilots didn't just fly them. They listened to them. Cole was already pulling the chocks, his movements efficient, betraying nothing. He knew what she was doing. He knew what Madsen had said. He also knew what the Wraith and the woman about to climb into it were capable of. As she ascended the ladder, he placed a hand briefly on the scarred fuselage. "Take care of her, Valkyrie," he murmured, using the call sign she hadn't heard since before the accident. Eva paused, looking down at him. She gave a single, sharp nod. The canopy lowered with a pneumatic hiss, sealing her inside the silent world of the cockpit. The world of frantic men and impossible odds vanished, replaced by the cool, calm glow of the avionics coming to life around her. The engines spooled up with a low, hungry whine that vibrated through the hangar floor. It was a sound unlike any other fighter, deeper, more resonant, a predator's growl. Without a word to the tower, without clearance, she taxied onto the runway. The TOC would be exploding with fury, but she had shut them out, her comms tuned to a single, encrypted channel. The one Ares team was using to broadcast their last stand. The throttle moved forward under her gloved hand, and the Wraith leaped. It didn't climb. It launched, a black arrow fired into the churning, bruised sky of the approaching storm. The transition was violent. One moment she was on the solid earth, the next she was a captive of the maelstrom. Rain hammered the canopy, not as drops but as a solid sheet of water. The wind shear grabbed the F-12, trying to rip its wings off. Warning lights flashed across her console, the onboard computer screaming at her about G-limits and structural integrity. She ignored them. Her eyes were locked on the terrain-following radar, a ghostly green river flowing across her heads-up display. This was the Needle's Eye, a network of canyons so tight that sunlight never reached the bottom. It was a place no aircraft was meant to fly. She pushed the stick forward, diving into the maw. The world dissolved into a blur of gray rock and whipping mist. The canyon walls were so close she could see the striations in the stone, feel the compressed air buffeting the cockpit. She flew not by sight, but by instinct, her hands and feet making 1,000 microcorrections a second, a conversation between her nerves and the soul of the machine. The F-12 responded, its thrust vectoring nozzles angling, its control surfaces twitching. It was an extension of her own body. She felt the enemy radar sweeps pinging against her fuselage, weak, confused pulses that couldn't lock onto the aircraft's radar-absorbent skin. They were looking for a plane in the sky, not a ghost breathing on the rocks below. For 12 agonizing minutes, she was a whisper in the storm, a phantom in the stone, hurtling toward a battle everyone else believed was already lost. She burst from the mouth of the canyon like a cannon shot, emerging from the storm's fury into the relative calm of the mountain's lee. Below her, the ridge was a hellscape of tracer fire and mortar explosions. She was behind them, an angle of attack they never anticipated. Her thumb moved to the weapons console, her mind a cold, clear instrument of calculation. The enemy command position was a fortified bunker dug into a rocky outcrop, directing the symphony of destruction against the trapped SEALs. It was her first target. She didn't fire a missile with a telltale smoke trail. She selected a single GBU-53/B Stormbreaker, a small-diameter bomb designed for precision. The bay doors slid open silently, and the ordnance dropped, a falling dart of metal. It flew on its own, guided by her laser designation, a silent, inevitable messenger. On the ridge, SEAL Petty Officer Cade Aries 1 Jennings was pressed against a rock, the air around him thick with cordite and pulverized stone. His rifle was hot, his ammunition low. The rhythmic thump of the heavy machine gun had become the drumbeat of his own death. He was preparing to make a final, desperate charge when something changed. The machine gun stopped, not just paused, but ceased entirely. A moment of bewildered silence descended, broken only by the wind. Then, a low, rolling boom echoed from the enemy's position. A plume of dust and smoke rose from the command bunker, which had simply collapsed in on itself. The mortar fire, once surgically precise, became sporadic, undirected. Cade risked a glance over his cover. The coordinated attack had dissolved into chaos. He keyed his comm, all stations. Report. What was that? The answer came from his flank. I don't know. No sound, no warning. It just happened. It was an impossible strike. A ghost had just saved them. High above, unseen and unheard, Rostova watched the red icons on her tactical display flicker and die. One down. She banked the F-12, its sharp form melting back into the mountain's shadow. The hunt had just begun. The enemy, though momentarily shattered, was not broken. They were seasoned guerrillas, accustomed to the harsh terrain. The loss of their command bunker shocked them into a new, more dangerous phase. Realizing a threat had bypassed their static defenses, they adapted with terrifying speed. From concealed positions in the caves that riddled the mountainside, they rolled out Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft cannons. The twin-barreled weapons began to spit streams of incandescent shells into the air, creating a deadly web of flak over the ridge. Mortar teams, no longer centrally directed, began walking their rounds in a creeping barrage toward the SEAL's last known position. They were flushing them out, forcing them to move into the open. In the TOC, the brief moment of elation evaporated into renewed horror. Multiple Zu-23s active. They're boxing her in, an analyst shouted. On the main screen, the airspace around the F-12's projected position lit up with crisscrossing lines of fire. Colonel Madsen watched, his face pale. He had sent men to die on that ridge, and now he had allowed a grounded pilot to fly a billion-dollar prototype into a death trap. His rigid certainty had cracked, replaced by the sickening weight of his own fallibility. Valkyrie 1-1, this is Archangel, he transmitted, his voice tight. Disengage and egress immediately. That is a direct order. The only reply was the hiss of an open channel. She wasn't listening. She was working. From his position, Cade saw the situation devolving. Archangel, we cannot hold. The barrage is too heavy. We need that ghost to clear the AAA, or we are cooked. The desperation in his voice was raw. Madsen gripped the edge of the console, his authority rendered meaningless. He had lost control. The battle was now in the hands of the pilot he had scorned. Inside the cockpit, Eva was a portrait of focused calm. The sky outside was a lethal garden of blossoming flak. Her threat display was a Christmas tree of red warnings. The colonel's order to retreat was a distant, irrelevant noise. Retreat was not an option. The SEALs would be overrun. She saw the geometry of the problem, the firing angles of the cannons, the dead zones behind the rock formations. A normal attack pattern was suicide, so she wouldn't use one. She pushed the stick hard over and down, diving the F-12 not away from the ridge, but straight toward it. She dropped below the lip of the canyon she had just exited, disappearing from the enemy's view entirely. The flak continued to pepper the empty sky where she had been. She was now flying deep inside the terrain, the rock walls a few feet from her wingtips, her speed a terrifying blur. She was approaching the main ridge from below, a blind angle the gunners couldn't cover. But a direct descent was impossible. The cliff face was nearly sheer. This was the moment she had been training for, the reason she understood the Wraith's soul. Her grandfather had called it the Viper climb in his old notebooks, a theoretical maneuver for an aircraft with vectored thrust, allowing it to use a vertical surface for a surprise attack. It had been deemed impossible, a pilot's fantasy. Eva reached down and toggled a switch, disabling the flight computer's primary safety protocols. A cascade of amber warnings screamed for her attention. She ignored them, pulling back on the stick and slamming the throttles to their maximum. She angled the F-12's nozzles downward. The aircraft responded not by climbing, but by clawing at the air, its nose pointing almost straight up. The machine shuddered, groaning under stresses it was never designed to endure. For a heart-stopping second, she was hovering, suspended against the rock face by 2 columns of raw fire. Then, like a predator scaling a wall, the F-12 began to climb. It ascended the sheer cliff, a gravity-defying spectacle of engineering and sheer will, rising over the ridge's edge like some mythological beast. For the Zu-23 gunners, it was as if a demon had materialized out of the ground. One moment they were firing at an empty sky, the next, the black, angular shape of the Wraith was hanging in the air 50 meters in front of them, its engines roaring. They had no time to traverse their weapons. Eva's thumb squeezed the trigger for the 25mm cannon. A stream of high-explosive incendiary rounds, a sound like tearing titanium, ripped through the first gun emplacement, turning it into a fireball of twisted metal and erupting ammunition. She pivoted the aircraft with a burst of thrust, a dancer in a 4-ton suit of armor, and annihilated the second gun crew before they could even register the threat. A third, further down the line, managed to get off a few wild shots before a short, precise burst from her cannon silenced it forever. With the immediate anti-air threat eliminated, she turned her attention to the cave's spewing enemy fighters. She had one last weapon, a thermobaric bomb designed to create a massive pressure wave. She climbed, a swift, elegant arc against the gray sky, and rolled inverted at the apex. The bomb released, a dark teardrop falling toward the mountain. The resulting explosion was not a sharp crack but a deep, resonant whump that seemed to suck the very air from the ridge. The entrances to the cave network collapsed, sealing the remaining enemy forces inside their own tomb. A profound silence fell over the mountain. The battle was over. Eva keyed her calm, her voice as calm as if she were ordering coffee. Ares 1, this is Valkyrie. Your exfil window is open. I have the watch on the ground. Cade and his men slowly, incredulously, got to their feet. They looked up at the black fighter circling lazily above them, a silent, dark angel against the storm clouds. A few minutes later, the welcome whump-whump of a rescue helicopter's blades echoed through the canyon. Ares' team was going home. The F-12 touched down on the runway with barely a whisper, its landing gear absorbing the impact with fluid grace. The desert air was cool, the sky above now a blanket of stars. In the TOC, the stunned silence had held for nearly 20 minutes. Ever since the exfil helicopter had confirmed Ares' team on board, all accounted for Colonel Madsen stood motionless, staring at the screen where the call sign Valkyrie 1-1 pulsed a steady, triumphant green. The comms crackled one last time. It was Cade, the SEAL team leader, his voice raspy but clear. Archangel, be advised. We are en route to base. And tell that pilot. Tell the ghost. Thank you. Madsen could only nod at the empty room. He looked at the file on his desk, its cover stamped in red. Rostova, EVA, capped. Flight status, grounded. The words seemed like a foolish, arrogant lie. As Eva lowered the canopy and the whine of the engines died, she saw Master Sergeant Cole waiting at the foot of the ladder. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, then at the aircraft, and a slow, deep pride filled his weathered features. He gave her a short, sharp nod of profound respect. An hour later, the rescue helicopter landed with a roar of downwash. The SEALs disembarked, weary, battered, but alive. Their leader, Cade, his face smudged with soot and exhaustion, strode past the waiting medics and the debriefing officers, his eyes scanning the tarmac. He saw Eva standing near the hangar, out of the spotlight. He walked directly to her, ignoring Colonel Madsen who had come out to meet them. He stopped a foot in front of her, his gaze intense. He didn't offer a handshake or a word of thanks. He simply brought his hand to his brow in a salute, as crisp and formal as any on a parade ground. He held it, his eyes locked on hers, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of the debt owed. In that moment, he wasn't a decorated special operator and she wasn't a disgraced pilot. They were just two warriors and one had saved the other. Later that night, the hangar was quiet again. The only sounds were the metallic ticking of the F-12's engine cooling and the lonely howl of the desert wind outside the massive doors. Eva stood beside the aircraft, her hand resting on the scarred panel near the cockpit. The very spot that had nearly been her tomb felt warm, alive. She had not only vindicated herself, but she had reconnected with the machine, proving what she had known all along. It wasn't pilot error that day. She had been pushing the machine to a place no one else knew it could go, finding its limits so she could one day exceed them. She had listened to its soul, and today it had answered. Her grandfather's hawk patch felt heavy on her shoulder, a mantle of legacy passed down and finally earned. She felt no elation, only a quiet, profound sense of rightness. The roar of battle had been replaced by the dignity of silence. Miles away, in his sterile office, Colonel Madsen sat alone in the dark. He opened her file. With a single, decisive keystroke, he deleted the addendum detailing her grounding. He typed a short, concise entry. Actions during Operation Serpent resulted in the successful rescue of Ares' team. All previous restrictions rescinded. Callsign Valkyrie reactivated. Effective immediately, he closed the file. There would be no ceremony, no public praise. That wasn't how this world worked. Respect wasn't given in speeches. It was earned in fire and blood, in the space between a command and an action. And on a desolate ridge under a stormy sky, Captain Eva Rostova had earned it all.